Jihoon adjusted his backpack. Excitement thrummed in his veins. The forest of spirits beckoned. It promised mystery. It promised adventure. Tonight he would capture its secrets. He held his camera aloft. The familiar weight was comforting. He was ready. Jihoon took a deep breath. The air was cool and damp. The scent of pine and earth filled his nostrils. He smiled. This was his element. He stepped across the threshold. The forest welcomed him. He began to walk. The path was narrow and winding. The trees pressed in close. Their branches seemed to reach out to him. He could feel the forest watching. He pressed on. He was not afraid. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds sang. No insects chirped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The silence was unnerving. It pressed against Jihoon's eardrums. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Jihoon continued deeper into the forest. He kept his eyes and ears open. He was looking for movement. He was listening for any sound. But there was nothing. The silence was absolute. He paused to catch his breath. He looked around. The trees seemed to be closing in. Their branches intertwined overhead. They formed a dense canopy. No light penetrated. He felt a sense of unease. Something wasn't right. But he couldn't place it. He shook his head. He was letting his imagination run wild. This was just a forest. He continued on. A flicker of movement caught his eye. He stopped, his gaze darting between the trees. There it was again, a shadow. It was moving between the trees. He raised his camera. He zoomed in on the shadow. It was difficult to make out in the darkness. He whispered, "What are you?" His voice echoed strangely in the silence. The shadow moved closer. Jihoon's heart began to race. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. He held his breath. He looked through the camera lens. His blood ran cold. A face stared back at him. It was pale and gaunt. Its eyes were black and empty. He could see its teeth. They were long and sharp. The face was not visible to the naked eye. It could only be seen through the camera's lens. A whisper reached his ears. It seemed to come from the shadow. The voice was low and guttural. The words were unintelligible. Another whisper followed. Then another. They were getting louder. They were closing in. Panic surged through Jihoon. He stumbled backward. He tripped over a root. He fell to the ground. He dropped his camera. The whispers became screams. They seemed to be coming from all directions. He looked around frantically. The forest seemed to be closing in on him. The trees were reaching out for him. Their branches were like claws. He scrambled to his feet. He ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get away. But the forest seemed to have a life of its own. The trees shifted and moved. The path twisted and turned. He was lost. He ran until he could run no more. He collapsed on the ground. He was surrounded. He looked up. The face from the camera was staring down at him. It was closer now. He could feel its cold breath on his face. He screamed. The camera lay on the forest floor. Its lens captured the last image of Jihoon. He was gone. The forest was silent once more. The only evidence of Jihoon's presence was the camera and the footage it contained.